Well, there was a time when they used to say that behind every great man there had to be a great woman.
Now Autumn Glow lays down the challenge to Manal. Autumn Glow and Manal stride for stride. Erno's cued the fence and then came Lazura. It's Autumn Glow. She's really starting to use this action of hers, and the filly's bounding away with the T-Rose. Autumn Glow remains unbeaten.
To you, we say, sister, for themselves, standing on their own 2 feet. Yeah.
Via Sistina raced up now, hits the lead. Aliana's racing home well on the inside. Via Sistina in front from Aliana. Via's going to dig. Via neck in front. Aliana's driving, but Via Sistina goes back to back in the wing stakes.
Ooh, to celebrate the conscious liberation of the female.
And now on PG Podcast Network, it's time for the year-round carnival with Vince Accardi and your host, Racetrack Rolfie.
The sisters were back in action. Chris Waller's sisters, superstars, Via Sistina, Autumn Glow. Could even have included horses like Lazura and, of course, Aliana. Stretched Via Sistina. So, make me think of Beware the Injured Golfer. Chris Waller said, let's call that meeting off. And instead, he wins all the main races. Why wouldn't he? What a superstar trader he is. Good to see his good horses back. Welcome to Year-Round Carnival. Each and every week we have a good look at the best races around Australia, mainly Melbourne and Sydney, and we do it via Vince Accardi's Daily Sectionals lens. G'day, Vince.
Hello, Ralphie. Yeah, I like that. I like that what you said about Waller. That's so crazy, isn't it?
Well, we should start with how the track actually played because, my goodness, it looked like it was raining cats and dogs in Sydney on the Friday. I saw Emma Freeman from Channel 7 just post a little video and it just then said looked like the Ark. Yet, not only did they race, it seemed like they raced on a fair track. Just for, I'll get your take on what the data showed. I saw Chris Waller's video and he said, look, I'd actually rather 100 mils on the Friday than 5 because it's going to go right through the profile. And as long as it's not race day rain, this track's remarkable. Give us your thoughts.
I have to totally agree with that. If there's no race day rain, it's just unbelievable. Like all that rain, goodness me, if that had happened in some of our tracks in Victoria or other tracks in New South Wales or even Queensland, they would have cancelled, right? But here, the track was superb. If you take away the 3 races where I felt were the biggest first section slows, like race 5, almost between 19 and 20 lengths below benchmark. Race 8, definite slows, 14.5 lengths below benchmark. And then race 10, 28, which is the big obscurity of the entire day. The actual to the 800 was like 8 lengths below standard. And then the big improvements from that point onwards to the 600, racing almost 3 lengths below benchmark, 400, 1.5, and that Golden Straight, unbelievable, almost benchmark. I mean, fantastic.
Well, several horses broke benchmark over the last 200 metres, which you would not have thought possible on the actual Saturday. Let's look at the main race, the Winx Stakes, of course, named after the superstar, and there's starting to become some fair comparisons with this superstar with Via Sistina coming through. Might start here with an email from one of our members, Luke. Hey, Ralphie, I had a query on the heavy track with Via Sistina, but then she goes and does that. My question is, I suppose, is she bulletproof, or is the track not as bad as I thought it would be? I thought it would be heavy 20 with all the rain we had lately. So what's your thoughts there, Vince? And what did Via Sistina to do on the day?
Well, the funny thing is overall WTI plus 5.1.
So that's wet track indicator?
Yep. So pretty solid. Like if I just did a comparison to say something like Autumn Glow plus 13.
Wow.
Big difference, right? Autumn Glow showing all the Winx-like capabilities on the wet. Via Sistina plus 5.1, that's definitely a pass mark. Yep. And given the nature of the way the race was set up, there's a possibility that could have even turned out to be slightly stronger, given the scenario of that field spread was massive from 14.5 lengths below benchmark to minus almost 21. Gave reasonably good franking that on a genuine heavy track, this horse handled it no problems at all.
So let's pull that apart a bit more. I would say off the top of my head, Winx's profile was about a +6 when she would resume as her first up profile, and her wet track indicator was round about it was a +10 or 12. I remember you saying she's actually a swimmer, apart from her class on top of the ground. So, Via Sistina, would it be fair to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I want your interpretation, that she handles it rather than loves it, and that was probably a case that her +2 would have been reflective of as well of the very slow tempo early.
For sure, absolutely. Had to make really big adjustments because on the Raws and the day the horses ranked around 30, and the reality is, and so this is about the misleading of overall final times and the treatment of that. You would just sort of mark it down. Well, just a performance that might have lacked overall depth if you were just purely looking at final time. But once you bring in that first section, and they've gone, -14.5 from a lead speed point of view, almost -21 for Via Sistina. That's pretty heavy. The average field pace was just around that 19 lengths below standard. Gives you another sort of insight that once you allow for that, what's that, 3 seconds, Ralphie? Now, we're not going to allow the whole 3 seconds, but you're going to have to allow a decent amount, minimum in my view. Minimum 2 seconds is the minimum. And the reality is this horse ended up with that +2.1 top performance of the day, or you can just almost say equal top performance of the day. Is, I guess, the big insight for me was this, Ralphie. How much more could I have scored it above the 2.1? I look at the split time between the 8 and the 6, 4.7 lengths below benchmark. Pretty sharp move in that next hidden fraction between the 6 and the 4 plus 1.7. You can see a real surge. And then there was a loss of almost 2 lengths between the 4 and the 2. That's pretty critical, that loss. And this is just all navigation. And then last 200 metres, 0.3 again above, with a rebound. Fairly confident that if you didn't quite have that surge between that critical point of the 6 and the 4, because it was over 6 lengths, and then have to face a reduction of 2 lengths in speed between the 4 and the 2, we probably would have looked at a final last 200 that would have been well above that +1 range, and might have even been able to match something like an Autumn Glow around 1.5 to 2, and therefore potentially brought up that score to, I'd say, maximum +3.
So the raw times comparing the two, because one's 1400, one's 1100, but the raw times -23.7 versus -10.7. But you've outlined some of the reasoning why there's heavy adjustments, and I say that to back the truck up a bit before this member's question for some real insight into your IVR work here, Vince from Bailey. Would love to know some key factors or processes used for scoring a much lower score, raw score of Via Sistina's up to 2.1. Interested to see what breakdown he uses to adjust accordingly and have a score equal to Autumn Glow on the Raws had a far superior performance before adjustments.
Well, the first angle, without like going into the real technicals, is you just look at the average field speed of Autumn Glow. It's 7.2 below is the average field speed versus 19.3. So that variation on its own is 12 lengths.
Yes.
Now that 12 lengths, if I apply that, and this is a real sharp technical analysis that brings supreme confidence when you're doing the adjustment. If I had the 12 lengths, take it off the 23.7, what do I end up with? I end up with around 11.7. That's what you end up with, right? Yeah. Versus 10.2, and then we look at the subtleties, and this is like super important now. The subtleties, the exertions. You can see Via Sistina's exertion was 17.8.
So that's the improvement from the 800 metre mark to the 400 metre mark.
Versus Autumn Glow's 2.5, and then you look at the distribution of energy. Number one, through all the sections of the race. And then number two, we put that micro lens on it. Like Autumn Glow, you look at those micro splits, 8 to the 6 minus 3, 6 to the 4 minus 1.3. So we're still improving, right? 4 to the 2.8, still building. Last 200, bang, 1.6. V16, as we touched on, we've got a 4.7 negative, massive surge to plus 1.7. That's very significant. And then we go to 0.3 below, like it's not good distribution of energy. So even though it got soft tempo and all that, the distribution was poor, not because the rider made it poor, it was the setup of the race.
Yes.
So once you blend all that, Ralphie, what you see is the margin between Aliana and Via Sistina is probably slightly unfair. Via Sistina, realistically, if all things were smooth, wins by a lot more.
Yeah, so I guess, and if you want the IVR report, you can get our sizzlers, and you also get our horses to follow right up. But the what you're basically describing there is one is a if you're into your shares, one is a graph over time, Autumn Glow, nice and smooth, on a nice angle, and the other one, Via Sistina, someone's just bought NVIDIA chips along the way because it's spiked through the roof at the 600 meter mark. And the other thing I reckon to put forward, that there's going to be improvement. Yes, the last 400 will around about benchmark range, but this is where I like comparing your daily rankings, Vince, because she's run the third best last 600 of the day, but when you factor in that ground was much firmer in the straight, the 13th best last 200, surely that's a big improvement to come too.
Oh, absolutely. And this is how you get there in the end, of trying to make these important adjustments. The Raws have a role to play, just like the adjustments, and then I guess the final part always is you apply the race matrix,
which is the build-in of lead-in runs from other opponents. So I'll tell you what, my initial reaction after the race was, what's the over-under on how many Group 1s these top four are going to win this spring? Just this spring, I reckon 7.5. So Aliana was super, Arapaho was super. Before we get to Chair Wolf, which was a bit of a talking point, forever and a day, you want to see quality stayers produce something first up. Now, Arapaho, we gave the equal best staying performance last year in its dominant Sydney Cup win. Don't worry about his age. He doesn't know how old he is. He's running superb. And Aliana, well, as Chris Waller kept saying, she just raced against the boys the whole prep and was sensational all the way until, very good, and then exploded in the derby. So what do we get out of Autumn Glow and for our mate Scotty Arapaho? So not Autumn Glow, we'll get to Autumn Glow, Aliana and Arapaho.
Well, Aliana, despite what I said about the distribution of energy, it still did suffer some technical difficulties in terms of free-flowing energy distribution between the 4 and the 2. It wasn't as bad as Via Sistina. So Via Sistina's loss is 2 lengths and Aliana's is only 0.9. So there's a length, Ralphie, a whole length, right? So that should translate over the last 200, right? But then when you look at the last 200 metres, this is, again, that impact. Via Sistina's last 200 was only 0.3. Aliana was 0.6. Only 0.3 better for a 1 length better energy distribution. So this is why I mentioned that, firstly, that had you not had that setup, Via Sistina wins by more. And then there's I believe there's a gap. And that gap's going to be continuing, I believe, should they meet each other. But Aliana, in its own right, the performance was outstanding. I mean, third best of the meeting, plus 1.6. Had to also have a monster mid-race move. Like the move for that horse was 19.6, Ralphie. And then when you look at Arapaho, who's going slightly quicker than both those horses to the 800, probably also, I feel, that critical pathway between the 4 and the 2 was not too far dissimilar to Via Sistina, just done at a different pressure. One's done it where there's an above benchmark. This is Via Sistina, where Arapaho between that critical point of the 6 and the 4 was basically going benchmark and then lost 1.5 lengths between the 4 and the 2 and then rebounded with just below benchmark. And obviously, is a sheer staying horse.
Oh, for sure.
Unbelievable return. 6 best of the day benchmark. Wow. There you go. 9-year-olds. Forget the number of 9. Forget it. This horse is on fire already.
Oh, he's going to run a race at Flemington, no doubt. If he's in this order. I just one quick one while you were talking there. I just looked up Aliana, first up last prep, beat the length by broadsiding the superstar Colt, 0.2 first up. So here, 1.6. This is significant prep to prep improvement.
Oh yeah, and this is the mare's story, the trend up.
Yeah.
It continues, and we're seeing it. We're seeing the trend up, and I feel we're going to see it with a couple of them, big trend ups.
So Wolf was a bit of a flashing light. Darren's asked, "Hey Ralphie, keen to hear your and Vince's assessments of Chad Schofield's bizarre ride on Wolf, horse 950 into 550, backed off the map. Then the jock delivers that." So before I get more off you, Vince, I just better add, because Joe Pride has sent a tweet out. There's been so much said about the ride on Wolf yesterday. Plan was to ride him forward, but the horse bungled the start. Chad made a split-second decision on the corner, which he was first to admit was incorrect. Next start the Chelmsford, and Chad will ride. So I think there's a combination of the horse missed the start. They didn't want to be back there, but once it did, you're going to take your medicine. But then on the corner, it's should I zig or zag? You've already said that James McDonald zigged, and what did Chad do on Chow Wolf?
Well, you look at this scenario like with Aliana, they're almost lockstep in terms of that first critical point, that 800 metre point. One's going 22.4 below, and the other runner, Chow Wolf, is going 22.2 below. So positioning at that point is sensational. Obviously, that next step in the move, in the mid race, you got 17.4 for Chow Wolf versus 19.6. But when you put the lens right down on it, there's a 2-length variation. The ride change on Aliana was far better, that 2 lengths. You got a decisive move on the horse, on Chow Wolf. And this was I feel, the difference. Because then when you look at that last 200 metres, they both had the same final last 200 metre, but Aliana's done more. How much are you going to contribute that to the rider? Well, realistically, the most you can contribute to the setup is 2 lengths, because that's the variation between the 8 and the 4 when you're looking at how far above or below benchmark. Now, I like to use that as one angle, but then I also like to look at what about the average field speed in that point? Because the benchmark gives you one insight, but then when you look at the AFS and you say, okay, well, the average field speed is 5.2, and then I look at Aliana, again, Frank's that move from 2.8 below to 5.2. What's the difference? It's pretty much 2.4 versus a couple of lengths less, only 0.4, and just absolutely locks down that this was if you want to call it a misstep, that's the misstep. Now, we know from all the years of doing this work, how vital a rider is. Now, Chad's a good rider, for sure, but he's definitely no J-Mac.
There's good v great.
He's good, right? But this is what you've got to wear. Now,
yes.
Is this horse good enough to wear those mistakes? Well, okay, here's the first run. I mean, are we going to bring anything into consideration for fitness? Probably have to allow something, right? But again, we've probably got to allow something for the others as well. So who's going to make the difference? The tempo, the rider.
Very interesting. That 600 to 400 metre point, you described Via Sistina improved 6.4 lengths. Chad improved 3 lengths. So, and it's very evident. I looked at the steward's vision actually before we did this, so I could just get a real insight. I reckon Chad said, I'm on a first up horse. It's missed a start. I'll play the percentage game and the percentage game I'm referring to here is to not knock the horse around. I'm saying that's completely legitimate. Like, there'd be 10,000 Bart Cummings and Chris Waller horses doing exactly the same thing. The difference is J-Mac said, I've got the mouth guard in. This is a Group 1. I'm going for home, and I cut the corner with aggression. Now, as you said, Via Sistina gassed out, and also she's Via Sistina, a superstar. But in the end, I can't overly blame Chad Schofield because the blending run down the middle of the track for a first-up horse is actually what you want to do to not knock the horse around for the rest of the campaign.
Yeah, and the beauty is obviously the massive amount of money for the horse is probably another positive signal that obviously the stable have got to know that the horse is, airborne. Now,
100%.
is it completely airborne on the numbers? Well, 0.7 below benchmark, got in the top 10. We're not going to knock it, are we? Because we already identified now that there was at least a 2-length slip up. And you had that. See, this is the thing, Ralphie. We had the 2 lengths. We're now at 1.3. Horse sits rock solid up with the top 2. And everyone can start getting nervous about what's this horse going to do.
It's exciting. Well, speaking of exciting, the unbeaten Autumn Glow in the toy show quality. I remember your head rolled off this time last year, mid-August, when all of a sudden Chris Waller ran in a benchmark 72 on debut. Why would you do that unless you thought it was pretty good? Well, it was stunning. And this time it's returned with, as you said, equal best of the day, given they're both 2.1 with Via Sistina. What you do on the clock, and what type of projection have you got going forward?
Yeah, well, let's look at this setup. Overall, plus 2.1, locked in with Via Sistina, pretty much. We can give them the equal ranking, Ralphie. Maybe the older horse gets just that slightly more, but 6.8 lengths below benchmark first section, pretty cruisy, decent for the day. Like if you look at the blended day, that was decent. Between the 8 and the 4, 4.2 lengths below benchmark. The horse definitely didn't have to have an overreaction in the middle, and then super strong last 400, 0.8 above. Really franking, number one, how outstanding the horse was in the ground conditions and backed up by the numbers. Now, from a 2.1 perspective, compared to the first up run at Rose Hill, which was 3.1, Racemaster is saying we're pretty much like right on par around that 2 range. Different setup in terms of ground condition, of course. Now, if I look to say, what more adjustments could you have made with this horse? Pretty hard to make any other than any additional assessment for the ground, because the distribution of energy, like it was a 10 out of 10 ride, Ralphie. It was perfect. You could not have ridden this horse any better, and you couldn't have got a better horse on the day in the way it handled the ground. So it's very hard to say, what else can I give you other than the horse's natural improvement from one run to the next. So we're on track for this horse to, obviously, at its next start, definitely break the +3 zone. How much are we going to go above that? Well, we're still in big untapped territory. If I look at that last run at Randwick, Ralphie, before it went for that first spell over the 1,400 metres, there's some insight there. 12.3 lengths below benchmark first section. Now, different conditions on the day, of course, like in terms of how impacted the ground was. But I look at that last 400 metre close of +7.7 and then look at that first 1S and say, okay, what does that mean overall if I want to blend those thoughts into this day? Okay, the horse has gone 6 lengths faster through that first split time on much wetter ground, on ground conditions that were at least 5 or 6 lengths inferior to the day when it produced a +7.7. So now, if I was wild in my thinking, and I went to an extreme length, Autumn Glow could potentially be a +8, 9 horse, which is even better than where I originally positioned of at least +6.
Okay. So what we're talking is the elite of the elite. Now, Chris Waller has said the Epsom is the likely target, but he'll keep learning with it. He's not locking it in. And I can't help thinking there's two factors in play here. One, the mega money of the Golden Eagle is in play. And two, he has nominated him for the Cox Plate. Now, as a mate of mine, Mark said to me yesterday, Waller's got a history of nominating for everything. Okay. You wouldn't say there's zero chance while the nomination's there. So what type of projection has she got? Because given what you said that she can do that at 1400 at just her third career start, and that she's turned up with the picket fence, I'll call it, the best last 800, 600, 400, 200 a day. Is there some chance that her best will be in that mile range?
Well, it's like this. Brilliant milers can get out to 2,000 at the best level.
You've always said that, yes.
Yep. So why not this one?
Exciting times. So we have to say then that has Hawksy's got a fair duck on their heads too in Gangster Granny. She showed little glimpses last prep. What a fantastic return!
Yeah, it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Overall performance 1.4 above, like that's a beautiful leap, but also franking its ability on the wet ground, which is absolutely stunning. How can you knock this horse? This is a horse that also, in my view, had perfectly blended run, just didn't have that same engine over the last 200 metres, Ralphie. Just that's the difference. Now, how much of that you're going to allow for the difference? And this is, again, when you're looking at the technicals on the numbers, that 1S that's to the 800 metre point, Autumn Glow 6.8 below, Gangster Granny 5.7. So there is a 1 length difference. So if I was to say all things being equal, and you blend out the energy distribution, you would say to yourself, okay, well, if Gangster Granny went at the exact same speed as Autumn Glow, could it be possible that Gangster Granny's last 200 becomes a plus 1.1? Is that possible? So that's how I look at it and say, well, not quite. Maybe you would have broken benchmark for sure, but maybe it was just might be a 0.2 and not a plus 1. But it's returned in sensational fashion, Ralphie, and this is going to make money.
And the third of the Chris Waller winners on the day was Lazura in the I think it was the toy show it was called. First up over 1200. Last prep. This to me really looks like it's profiling as a typical Waller mare that's going to keep improving with age, because last prep showed good glimpses. It was third, albeit a bit well beaten in a Group 1 to two superstars in Lady Shenandoah and Lady of Camelot. Then it won the at Rose Hill over 1500, the Far Lap I think it's called, and just sort of slowly tapered from there. But to do this first up, that's saying I'm a player this spring.
Yeah, and I feel that the horse has come back genuine 2 to 3 length better horse. So we're going to have to factor that in this time in. We have definitely got a horse that's come back much better, Ralphie. Breaks are very similar, and this horse has just got that one trend. First prep to second prep, we've seen a clear sort of length and a half improvement. And then when you look at that second into the third prep, we've seen, again, was around a 1.5 length improvement. And now we've gone to another level. Like for this horse to come out and comfortably break benchmark, 0.5 above, get inside the top 10, which is, for me, a big barometer when you're looking at days like this where they're very, very, the ground conditions are very, very wet, and it softens the overall numbers. The ranking overall plays a huge role, and you look at who competed on the day. We know Via Sistina's, if not or close to, the best horse running around in the country at the moment. For you to get in so close to it, right, knowing that you're also where you are in your campaign, this is the biggest leaper from campaign to campaign, and it's still just going exactly like that, a sharp trend up. So if this is the case, then this horse is set to potentially in the next 1 or 2 starts start delivering several lengths above benchmark comfortably. And there's going to be, again, another run, depending on where Waller places it, is going to be winning more races.
Tell you what, he's been a juggernaut for near 20 years, Chris Waller, but he's set up for possibly his best spring carnival ever. There you go, because he got some horses going around, and Fangirl's going to Melbourne this week, and he just keeps rolling them out. So look, those 3 races dominated the top 12 on the day, so that's why I really wanted to do a deep dive on that. The one horse I want to ask you about from early in the card, Vince, just as a learning thing, I mean, Braithnock, the apprentice, who's going very well, riding lots of winners, he got this completely wrong in race 3 on Juju Kibu. just the importance of describing what a mid-race move can do and understanding that sometimes you got to take your medicine. He mucked up. He got too far back. And then to me, and I'm talking about the visual, he looked like he panicked. He thought, well, I've got to get going now and I'll rush. And the horse loomed and peaked. And I would say my initial thoughts were it was an impossibility what he asked it to do, and now the data's come through. Just describe what's happened in race 3 here, please.
Yeah, massive extension here. I mean, first of all, when you look at the setup of the race, 9.9 lengths below benchmark lead speed. And I look at the average for the race, around 17.3. So there's big gaps. So first of all, when you look at this particular one you're talking about, 21.6 lengths below benchmark. That's a long way off him. Even, the eventual winner. But that surge in the middle, which you rightly pointed out, Ralphie, 22.3 versus the winner's 18. That's a 4.3 length shift in acceleration. And boy, was that visible when you look at the last 400 metres about how big the impact, because the horses peaked between the 6 and the 4 with 0.6 above after that monster surge, which I guess to some extent you're entitled to do that when you're running slowly, but the distance is fairly long. So it's going to have fatigue, and the fatigue was on display. Last 200 metres, minus 3.4. So the overall loss of that big surge in the middle was 4 lengths. Now you look at the winner, and you say there's 4.3. So this horse would have at least finished second if it didn't have to combat that monster surge, where the winner lost, a lot more. Well, I'm not going to say less reckless or anything like that, but the reality was the surge there was only 18 lengths. And that makes a difference, 3/4 of a second.
Well, it's a smoother ride. That's the smartness of a Timmy Clark and a established senior Group 1 winning rider versus a kid. But yeah, I wouldn't be dropping off Juju Keeper off that. Just give us, we'll do a members bonus on Moonee Valley, but just before we cut to that, just give us an overview with Moonee Valley. The last meeting was its first meeting back post renovation, 2 weeks before, 2 weeks later. How much did it improve as far as what you saw on Saturday?
Yeah, well, very interesting.
Well, I was out 5, by the way, 2 weeks ago. Is true.
What surprised me, and maybe this is the reason why perhaps they put up the signal that we started off the day with an S5 and then transitioned to a G4. What was fairly evident is, number one, the assumption to the 800 metres overall, bang on that 0.37, that you would look at it from that perspective and say G4 sounds right. Yep. But then when you look at what took place at the 600, the loss is about 1.2 lengths, and then it was lost even further around that 4 to 1.1 or 1.2. So when I look at the 800 to the 400 and look at that gap, all day that stayed in the S5 zone.
And that's typical of Moonee Valley this time of year.
Yeah, it's not super, it's the end of the world. But then when you get into that last 200 metres, you got a plus 1.5, a plus 1.1. You get that because the rail placement's 5.
Yes.
Best part of the track. You're going to have more speed in it and ran superbly. So it's just that section.
A good return there by Barrack Hill winning the main race. We'll talk about that in the members bonus. If you want to become a member, you click through the website on my website there, racetrackralphie.com.au. For as little as $5 a month, you support the fact we're independent and free. You get best of the day from Melbourne and Sydney emailed to you every week. Opportunity to ask questions on the podcast every Sunday. I'll email you, and Group 1 members receive Group 1 bonuses most weeks of the year, certainly via the Spring Carnival, where we really dive in deep. So that's our members bonus today. Also want to look at 2 big trialers. I know a lot were washed out, but at Gosford, Private Harry and Jimmy Star, Everest contenders. Vince has put the clock on that. So if you're a Group 1 member, you'll also get some insights into that. In the meantime, thanks so much for listening to Year Round Carnival.